So Faygo has had easily one of the most remarkable yet controversial runs in the underground, hands down. From running the streets in Roblox, to then running them in real life, to then eventually having one of the craziest blowups to happen to any artist since the SoundCloud wave. All the way to now, where Faygo has become easily one of the most heavily criticized and disliked artists in the scene as a whole, due to his complicated label ties and just overall lack of output. But obviously, this kind of development and shift in reputation didn't happen overnight. So first things first, let's take a deep dive into where did Sofaygo start? Born October 3rd in the year 2001, Andre, also known as Sofaygo, was born in a city known as Grand Rapids, Michigan, but would at a very early age relocate to a county just north of Atlanta known as Cobb County, which is where Faygo would spend most of his childhood, growing up alongside his two younger brothers in a sadly less than favorable financial situation, which meant for a large part of Faygo's upbringing, he would often be going back and forth between his grandma's house, spending a lot of time listening to classic artists such as Ludacris, Missy Elliott, and even Michael Jackson, all of which are artists that would feed into Faygo's passion for music and dance, which wouldn't be fully realized until the year 2010. Which would end up being the year where Faygo decided to dive much deeper into his own interests, going from pursuing dance, to acting, to film, to basketball, till finally in the 4th grade he would end up joining his school's chorus just in hopes of learning how to sing. And as you could probably guess, not only did the class work to train his vocals, but it would also end up igniting Faygo's passion and love for music, which would really start to take form once Faygo found out that his cousin had access to his own studio, which was actually just an old MacBook with GarageBand on it, but nonetheless, that same setup would end up serving as the place where Faygo would go on to record and experiment with some of his earliest known records, with the only one known to the public nowadays being an unreleased single titled cheesily as Baby I Need You, which was recorded when Faygo was only 10 years old, and sadly, like most other tracks throughout this era, it has since been lost to time. But there is another hobby that Faygo would get into around this time that would, not to be dramatic, help mold and build him into the artist he is today, and that is Roblox. And before we take a look into this very, very deep rabbit hole, I want to go ahead and say that you guys shouldn't take anything I bring up from his past as me trying to clown him for being a kid. If anything, this story probably relates more to most of y'all anyways. So without further ado, let's fast forward to March of 2015, which would be the year where a nearly 13-year-old Faygo would end up meeting and becoming close with someone very crucial to his story, who's best known online as DK from the block. And although DK nowadays might not look like your typical Roblox player on first glance, around this time in early 2015, he was getting very heavily into the IMVU and Roblox animation community, which led him to learning a software called Lua, which, if you're unaware, is the primary scripting language used for making games and animations in Roblox, which will tie into something more important we'll talk about later. But getting back on track, with DK at the time, as mentioned, getting heavily into Roblox, it wouldn't be long before we'd introduce his close friend, being Faygo, to a now permanently deleted Roblox server he played on, called the Bando, which at its peak was quite a popular hangout / trap roleplay server, and as it sounds, it was made up of mostly just different kids looking to roleplay as different rappers or to rep different made up groups. And one of the groups on this server that Faygo would eventually end up joining was known as Team Los, which at the time was one of the biggest groups on the server due to the group being led by two different popular Roblox animation channels, one of which being a channel called Tastic Music and the other being known as Los Angeles, or as we know him, DK from the block, who would ultimately end up being the person to introduce Faygo to the Roblox trap and animation community. And not long after Faygo was introduced to the community, he would end up deciding to name his profile LozSantoz, which would officially kick off what we will call the Team Los era. And one of the most important pieces of this era would be Faygo's involvement in what is known as the Ro-Rap community. Ro-Rap, also known as the Roblox rap community, is, as it sounds, a community made up of mostly younger preteens that essentially made music based around Roblox RP. And it's within this community where Faygo would actually get a lot of his earliest music experience, by making and putting out a bunch of different Roblox audios, which could even be played in-game by making use of Roblox's music ID feature, which would allow for the music to be played in an in-game boombox and would actually start to gain Faygo somewhat of a small following within the community. And it didn't just stop at music, because with just a little bit of digging, you can find out just how dead set Faygo was on becoming a rapper, with there being forum posts, a Roblox music label he was a part of, and I even discovered a fully developed Roblox rap studio, which was released as a showcase, or at this point archive, for the different singles that a nearly 13-year-old Faygo was working on at the time, and releasing under his stage name of Young Santos. And the studio showcased such lost classics as These Streets, No Worries, Against the World, and finally LozSantoz, which is what I believe to be a full project due to the label sticker in the bottom right, and is also technically speaking now the first known Faygo project, which sadly, like most of the music from this era, it has since been lost to time, except for what hasn't. Which brings us slightly forward towards the later half of 2015, where Faygo, or at this time LozSantoz, would release one of his earliest known singles, titled as We Gon' Make It.
I can still see you haters with 2 blind eyes. I'm rising to the top.
And this single is really just the tip of the iceberg, with Faygo going on to release dozens of different singles throughout the rest of 2015, some of which are still available today thanks to a page known as Sofaygo, who would go on to archive such lost classics as Ball Like Curry,
I got my right hand up, been a ball like Curry.
Pound Cake Remix,
Now I can tell a lot of lies, but you ain't even hard if you ain't say it to my eyes.
and finally Los Anthem.
You know that we got it. Kicking the door like I'm Raleigh.
All of which were made throughout mid to late 2015 with some varying levels of quality. And although these tracks weren't getting that many plays on SoundCloud or on DSPs, through his previously mentioned use of Roblox's boombox and music code features, Faygo, aka LozSantoz, would actually start to gain a pretty solid following. And with this newfound following, he would end up next creating one of his earliest known YouTube channels called Dre from VU, where he would primarily create and upload IMVU and Roblox music videos that were made to mostly different Drake and Chris Brown songs, which, funnily enough, are 2 artists that Faygo himself says are big inspirations to what his sound would eventually evolve into. But sadly, it wouldn't last forever, because towards the later half of 2015, Faygo would get supposedly hacked by a group called 5K and in turn later banned off Roblox, which led to Faygo creating a second and final account on January 13th of 2016 under the name of LozSantoz. Which now brings us to the final and most infamous era in Faygo's Roblox career, being the Trill era, which was kickstarted by Faygo deciding to create his own new Roblox group known as Team Trill Entertainment. And with this new group came a lot of new enemies. And for the sake of saving your time and not sitting here all day going through Roblox politics, we will only be diving into the funniest one, and that is the beef that took place between Team Trill and Team 5K. And the whole reason for their beef and their back and forth all started because of the 2 groups being in competition to see who the top roaster was.
That's because your parents yelled at you and now you can't hear properly.
You sound like a stupid foreigner.
And they would end up resolving their problems in one of the most dangerous ways imaginable: Roblox music videos, with both sides dropping their Roblox animated threats with depictions of Roblox violence happening while usually some Chicago drill music from 2013 playing in the background. And although both sides would trade disses and go back and forth, with Faygo even dropping his first ever diss track on 5K called Tech 9.
Pull up in the Rari with the roof, Take 9 dot your nose, call you rude like you.
It sadly wouldn't end up being enough, because on January 16th of 2016, Faygo's Row Ops would drop a bombshell with their animated diss track called Team 5K Disses Team Trill. And this animated diss track Roblox music video thing would depict 5K sliding on Faygo, killing him, and then burying Santos aka Faygo in a row grave. Yeah. And apparently for the time, the video was so well done that it made Team Trill declare defeat. But Faygo didn't go down without a fight. He instead went into the Team 5K Roblox group chat and went crazy on everyone. First claiming his spot as the top roaster, and then going on to insult moms, Minecraft, road bangers, fat people, and way more. And if you do want to see the full logs, they'll be on my Discord linked below. This story was just too funny to skip over. And although nowadays these Roblox beefs in the community might seem silly, at that time the Roblox trap community was really just starting to grow. And if you were in the right place at the right time, the trap and roleplay community could actually be pretty lucrative. Which brings us back to Faygo's good friend, DK, who was around this time using the program mentioned earlier called Lua to program and create different role-playing games that would end up pretty quickly racking in tens of thousands of visits, which in turn could be translated to a new following, money, or really whatever you wanted from it. And so, feeling inspired by his close friend, Faygo, along with a few other Roblox creators, would end up coming together and programming quite an infamous Roblox game called the Trill House, which would end up fully releasing on June 13th of 2016 and would end up becoming quite a popular trap roleplay server, with the gameplay on release mainly just being walking around. But it was a roleplay server, and it obviously worked because the original 1.0 version of the game would go on to get nearly 15,000 visits, which at the time was pretty impressive. But that number is nothing compared to the later versions of the game, with the third version of the game which released only 7 months later on January 29th of 2017, racking in nearly 400,000 visits, which at the time was just unreal. And this is the point in time where I believe Faygo took a step back and started to realize that the audience for his music he was looking for was right in front of him. And so it wouldn't be long after the third version's release where Faygo would make his name change from SSGKobe to TRVLLINESE, which in turn brought along a whole new audience for his music, and he would get to work almost immediately, with Faygo all throughout 2017 really starting to experiment with his sound, with tracks such as Free Smoke Flow, Forget, and finally Push Start Hurt Heart. All of which would showcase Faygo experimenting with quite a few different sounds, and some of them would actually stick, with Faygo around this time averaging between 2,000 to 10,000 streams, which for an upcoming artist is still pretty impressive. And he would release a lot more than just these 3 singles, with Faygo throughout this period going on to release nearly 30 plus different singles, with a lot of the tracks from this era having obvious inspiration from artists like X and even Tecca, who is actually a surprisingly big influence to a lot of Faygo's early work. And most importantly, you can really just tell that Faygo was just having fun with the music, with Faygo throughout this time collaborating with a lot of his friends while also promoting his music through his server's boomboxes, which would give him a surprisingly big boost in listeners and would really allow him to build up his own audience, which eventually led to the release of one of his earliest known mixtapes titled Chasin' Bands, which released in October of 2017 and has since sadly been lost to time. But something that would be recovered from this period is Faygo's first known music video for his single titled O2 Shit, which released in November of 2017 and showed us a much younger and much lower resolution Faygo just filming around his neighborhood and getting the feel for his music. But Faygo starting to take his music more seriously didn't mean he didn't have time for Roblox, because if you're a dedicated enough fan, there is a goldmine of different content from this era which showcase what Faygo was up to at the time, with his infamous Discord calls leaking showing Faygo going back and forth with random British people in Roblox Discords.
You sound like a stupid foreigner.
And not only that, but around mid-2017, Faygo would open up yet another YouTube account under the name of LozSantoz, where he would start up his own original Roblox RP series called The Life of Andre, where he would just run around and roleplay on a street RP server with his group called the Playboy Club. And there's still more, including Roblox movies, roleplay Twitter accounts, and even an alleged Roblox marriage that took place in his server between Faygo and a catfish, all of which is according to an old friend of his named Lil Rutger. The point is, around this time, he was really just having fun and being a kid on the internet. But sadly, like most things, it wouldn't last forever, because moving into late 2017, it seems that Trill House's success would end up being somewhat short-lived, mainly due to the different rising problems on the server that pretty much went unchecked, whether it be the exploiting, the admin abuse, or worst of all, the e-dating. And there's plenty of different videos on YouTube that are still up to date where people would basically just walk around doing exploits, spawning in planes and swords and flamethrowers or really just whatever, all without getting punished. And not only that, but due to the server, as mentioned, having an e-dating problem, it wouldn't be long before the game would end up getting taken down due to Roblox's policy around players having in-game relationships. And although Faygo would try to relaunch the game with other versions releasing in early 2018, sadly none of them would really be able to replicate the numbers of the original release, which would ultimately end up leading to Faygo quitting Roblox in early 2018, and instead deciding to really put his all into the music, which started with Faygo completely rebranding his image both online and in person, with Faygo starting to dye his dreads, wear different clothes, and as he puts it, get on what Atlanta was on at the time. And as is tradition, he would end up making yet another name change from the iconic name TRVLLINESE to something a little simpler, being Neezy, which would kick off arguably one of his most progressive eras yet, which started with Faygo almost immediately after the change getting to work, by creating new music videos and even releasing quite a few new gems around this time, with tracks like Check,
Please give me my check, please. I turn her to an ex. No.
Colder,
You leaving, it just gets colder. I know that I only get.
and Southside Story.
I be at the seat, go. You go where your bitch go.
And all of these tracks, as you could probably tell, showed Faygo bouncing around a lot between a bunch of different styles and experimenting quite a lot with its beat selection, which would eventually lead to Faygo getting in contact with an at the time small type beat producer known as Polack Productions, who was at the time releasing a bunch of different Pierre and Cardi inspired instrumentals, which would eventually catch Faygo's eye and lead to the two working together and releasing quite a well-known gem in the Faygo community titled #DoThat.
These niggas won't talk down on me. How do I respond to that? These bitches won't fuck all on me, but won't get no follow back.
And although at the time this song was by no means an overnight success, it would be the start of a relationship between both Faygo and Polack that later on would end up spawning a ton of legendary music. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there is one often overlooked artist who would help to completely evolve Faygo's sound and flow almost overnight, and that is an artist who's best known online as Ayebandits. Bandits, also known as Ayebandits, is an artist/producer from Philly who was coming up in the SoundCloud scene around the same time as Faygo. And eventually, over time, due to both artists having mutual connections, they would find each other on IG and start going back and forth, messaging each other about working together on some new music, which would eventually end up happening, with Faygo going forward to release his first ever tape on September 14th of 2018, titled Goonland, with features from both Flex and obviously Ayebandits. And for a first official release, this tape is pretty impressive. But easily the highlight of this tape is the single featuring Ayebandits titled No Hook.
Baby,
and this track is arguably one of the most important in Faygo's discography, with his vocals actually being decently mixed, his instrumental not sounding like a free Cardi type beat he got off YouTube, and finally his flow, which was incredibly smooth and high energy throughout pretty much the whole track. And as you could have probably guessed, almost all three of these elements were in some way impacted by Ayebandits, which, as you'll see, might end up becoming a bit of a problem later down the road. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we have to talk about something important, being how was Faygo even marketing the music at the time? And it was by pretty simply posting his own snippets. Since obviously at the time TikTok wasn't even really a thing, Faygo would instead use an app called Triller to make his snippet videos, and they actually played a surprisingly big role in helping Faygo get his music out there. And looking back nowadays at just how simple these videos were, with Faygo usually just dancing around in his bedroom and singing, it shows you really don't need much besides good music. But as we come towards the end of 2018, we have one of the last singles that released that year being somewhat of a cult classic, titled GSL.
I make music, I don't eat, I see demons in my sleep.
Which stands for Goons Still Live. And this song also released alongside a classic retro style music video, which in itself showed 2018 Faygo stacking different sets while also repping two different collectives he was a part of at the time, being both the previously mentioned collective, Playboy Club, that he got from Roblox, and also a new collective that he founded around this time called Goblin Gang, also often referred to as GG. And this is a collective that is heavily referenced in the music around this era, but sadly it has mostly an unknown history and only really one confirmed member, being Faygo's close friend, who we all know as DK, who, as a quick side note around this time, was still very close with Faygo. And he had even been releasing quite a good bit of music around this time, with his track First Day Out releasing in mid-2018, which, as it sounds, was released after he had a short run-in with the police, which led to him getting locked up and then let out on probation a little while after, which sadly, as we'll see, wouldn't end up being his last time dealing with the system.
Don't do it, man. Free DK.
But getting back on track, the previously mentioned song, titled GSL, or Goons Still Live, ultimately would end up being the song to mark the end of this so-called Neezy era, and would finally transition us into what most people call the golden era of Faygo, being the $Faygo era, which was all kickstarted with a spree of different singles that released all throughout late 2018, with tracks such as No Hook 2, La La, Off Top,
Straight out that crib, I told my fucking
Out of Bounds,
so lost. All you niggas gon' drown in the sauce. I know baby, she like how I fly.
and Capped Up,
These niggas be capped, take it how she let me tell.
all being released right before he dropped his second ever mixtape, which released on January 1st of 2019, titled as We Are Aliens, which released with only 3 tracks and had production credits for both Ayebandits and Polack. And this tape is where Faygo would really start to understand his sound. From the beat selection to the flows and melodies, each of these tracks had a lot of replay value. And not long after releasing this project, he would then go on to create yet another collective under the name of Runna, which, much like Goblin Gang, it was another collective that was very heavily referenced in the music, with terms like Chief Runna being pretty much Faygo's second name. And this group would actually put together a pretty solid roster, with artists such as Trulo, Slump 6, and Dom Corleo being added to the group way before they got to where they are today. But there still is one more member who we can't forget to talk about, being DK, who sadly around this time would end up getting locked up yet again on unknown charges. But even with this close friend getting locked up, Faygo would not stop the momentum he had heading into February/March of 2019, with Faygo then going on one of the craziest single sprees I've ever seen, with tracks like Montclair Bandit,
Get that nigga, yeah, that little nigga over there.
You Know,
You know I ain't telling no lies. Shawty done fell in love with a slime. Don't go nowhere, your heart is mine.
It's on Hits,
She like Faygo, where you at, boy? Is you here? And I say no.
Okay Right
I
Now,
ride alone and I'm riding for show. Ain't got no body bag, but my
Titan,
I just came in with a child today. I can't let nobody walk it down. Tell
Hayakamaru,
that love but I catch up. I'ma draw down, never let her run a check.
Applause,
Say that he finna do something. I know that he capping, I know he a bluff. I know he a
and way more releasing back to back to back. Alongside Faygo also doing exclusive drops with an underground page called Trap Daily, and also linking up with another local ATL artist, one of which being someone you've likely heard of recently, being Glock 40 Spaz. And sadly, although they wouldn't really release any official music together, it would end up giving him even more of a push. And with all of the hype building around his name, it wouldn't be long before he would release his third mixtape on March 30th of 2019, titled as Delineation, which would end up being yet another extremely successful release, with each track being received pretty damn well. Alongside Faygo's close friend DK, as mentioned earlier, getting out just in time to shoot the legendary music video to Faygo's single, Hits on Hits. But not everyone was so excited about how well Faygo was doing at the time, because only a few days after Faygo released his project, Delineation, Ayebandits would release his track titled Real Shit Though.
Cause we got them posts. Nigga took my flow, then he blew up. I was on her thought, she almost threw up. Just why me glowing, finna go up, down.
In which, towards the middle half of the track, he would end up sending shots at Faygo, saying that he took his flow and then blew up off it, which was only really a small diss compared to his next release, titled What the Fuck.
Let Faygo, he hatin', he know that my flow. Hatin', let nigga go get you some dough. You not about that shit that you put in your raps. Smell your head like a motherfucking rap. Yeah, why you lying, nigga? Quit all that.
Which, as you can hear, it was a much more direct shot of Faygo. But this diss would ultimately result in nothing, with Faygo just deciding to not respond, whether it be not to give him clout or just not wanting to feed into it, no one really knows. And tragically, only a few years later, on February 15th of 2021, Ashton Elijah Webb, also known as Ayebandits, would tragically get involved in a shooting that took place in his hometown of Philadelphia, which sadly led to him passing away at the young age of 17. Which means when he was producing such classic tracks like No Hook, Capped Up, Get Right, or Dear Little Boy, he was only 15 years old, which is just beyond crazy to me. And stepping quickly away from the video, if you would like to donate to his family and show some support, the link to his GoFundMe and other support links will be linked in the description. And obviously it goes without saying, but long live Bandits. But one beef that would catch Faygo's attention and result in quite a lot of back and forth is the infamous beef between Sofaygo and Slayworld. This beef originates all the way back to May 14th of 2019, with the release of Kankan's track, Slime. And where he would send shots at Faygo for allegedly sneak dissing him on Twitter, which would quickly lead to Faygo's response, which would release only a few weeks later on June 5th of 2019, titled infamously as Rap Rhymes. And it kind of goes without saying, but this response was just insane on a lot of different levels, making it work as both a diss track and just a good ass song. And although the beef at the time was a little bit petty, it would end up causing bad blood between both Faygo and another Slay artist, which we'll talk about a bit more later. But for now, Faygo was pretty much unbothered. After coming off of the back of 3 successful releases and also winning over a part of the Slay underground community with his response to Can, it was pretty obvious he was ramping up for something pretty big, which would end up happening with Faygo next releasing arguably one of his best / most important projects, which was titled as War, releasing on June 29th of 2019 and having some of Faygo's best work yet. And not only was it well received, but it would also end up being the tape to get him an offer by a very well-known record label known as Internet Money, which led to Faygo even flying out to LA when he was only 17 to consider the offer, which he would ultimately end up turning down. But something very important that Faygo would get from this opportunity was a connection with a very well-known Internet Money artist known as Lil Tecca, who at the time was pretty much at the peak of his career, just coming off the back of one of the biggest releases of that year with this song Ransom. And due to Tecca seeing the insane potential behind Sofaygo's sound, it wouldn't be long before the two artists would hop on a FaceTime call and decide to start working together on some new music, which is what ended up giving us Faygo's breakout hit, which released on August 4th of 2019, being Knock Knock, which would even release with extra promotion on Twitter, with Tecca tweeting out the track with a video of Faygo dancing to the snippet attached, which at the time would be a pretty big look for Faygo. But this track was far from being an overnight success, and as we'll see, it wouldn't really get its flowers till quite a bit further down the line, which we will get to, but for now, Faygo just kept applying pressure, dropping music videos, new singles, and even releasing one last tape to round off the year, which released on October 25th of 2019, titled as Hostility. And it was yet another short but highly successful tape, with all 5 tracks being received extremely well, along with track 5 on the tape having even more production done by Lil Tecca, which at the time was only really a sample of the music this duo would go on to produce. Because only a few months later, entering the new year on January 10th of 2020, we would get a legendary 7-track project that was entirely produced by Tecca and titled as Angelic 7. And not only would this project do well numbers wise, but it would also get Faygo in contact with his current manager, being Lamar Jaswal, who at the time was working as an A&R for Alamo Records and would even scout Faygo in hopes of getting Faygo to sign. But unfortunately, Alamo would for some reason end up turning down Faygo. But what really mattered was the connection he got with Lamar, who would later down the line end up becoming his day-to-day manager. But getting back on track, there is still one standout single in this project, which as teased earlier relates back to Faygo's original beef with Can, and that is the infamous single titled as Let the Girls Stay. And this track has quite the history, so just try to follow along. As mentioned earlier, both Can and Faygo had gotten into their own beef, and since both Kankan and Summrs are close friends, that obviously created bad blood between the two. But that doesn't really tell us why Tecca would step in and produce the diss track aimed at Summrs. The reason why Tecca would end up getting involved is because not too long before Faygo and Tecca had started working together, Summrs would end up trash talking Tecca and releasing a diss track on September 15th of 2019 titled Fuck the Industry. Which was made because Summrs was mad at Tecca for giving SSGKobe an instrumental that was originally intended for Summrs to rap on. So in response to what was probably a misunderstanding, Summrs went crazy on Twitter and IG Live saying that he only wanted to work with Tecca for clout, and when someone eventually asked our humble king the infamous question,
We're gonna get a Slayworld collab.
And in response, as I'm sure we all know, Faygo would come out with a bombshell of a diss track making fun of Summrs for acting tough online, his drug abuse, and even shedding light on a situation that happened in mid-2019, where supposedly Summrs got robbed by an at the time close friend of his named Jayway, and in response to this situation, he called the police instead of handling it personally. And not only that, but Summrs would also end up fighting the same guy, and they kinda ended up drawing. Hence why Sofaygo is talking about the white boy thing. And just overall, this diss track was executed both well as a song and a diss, which is part of the reason why this beef would get just blown so far out of proportion and reported on over and over
the
and over
Slayworld
again.
and Sofaygo beef.
Even though only a month later, the beef would get squashed by both Faygo and Summrs, with the two agreeing that it's in the past and it's just better to focus on the music, which is exactly what Faygo would end up doing, by going on to release nearly 3 different projects over the course of just 3 months, with projects such as The Reveal, For You, and Web all dropping over the course of just a few months, and being arguably some of Faygo's best work to date. All of which was followed up by Faygo finally graduating from high school, which yes, means that everything we've talked about has taken place while Faygo was still in high school, making it just even more impressive. And so, with Faygo's newfound freedom, it wouldn't be long before he decided to move to New York and start working very closely with a local artist known as Pasto Flocco, who's also conveniently an extremely close friend of Tecca's. And together he would work with Faygo on tracks like Double R, Pop Out, and Energy, all of which would be received extremely well by the fans. And it even led to speculation that Faygo might have temporarily been a part of Lil Tecca's collective, Angelic, which would make sense due to how closely tied he was to both Tecca and Pasto, but either way, Faygo just wouldn't stop applying pressure, going on to release music videos for practically every song that was buzzing at the time, with videos being released for Quit Smoking Dabs, G2, Lust, Keep It Cool, Controlling, even the previously mentioned Flocco collabs. And around the same time Faygo would start working with Flocco, he would also start working with nowadays a quite controversial artist known as SSGKobe. And together the two would release just some absolute classic tracks such as Vitamins, Demons, and later down the line tracks like Okay Let's Go and Late Nights, which would go on to get streamed millions upon millions of times, cementing this duo as quite a legendary one. But not only was Faygo starting to get consistent music-wise, he would also start to really learn and understand how to market himself, with images of spiders and webs being plastered pretty much all over his album covers and social media, which made it a huge part of his branding. And it also conveniently tied into his third and final collective he founded around this time, being Web, which most fans might know nowadays as GoStar. And this collective consisted of a wide range of different talent, having artists and creatives such as Backwoods, It's Too Easy, Bryce Unknown, Y2, White Collar Will, Wolfface Joey, Sports VVS, Zoo, and even more, counting Faygo's manager Lamar, who would officially end up becoming a part of the team in August of 2020, and would help Faygo become far more marketable by managing his social media and also dropping the $sign from his name in place of a normal S, which some would argue would end up being for the worse. But either way, with this new collective, he would gain a new tight-knit circle of different artists and creatives to roll with and bounce ideas off of, which would definitely help with the rollout of his next release, which would end up being his most ambitious release yet, which was the release of his single titled Off the Map, which was released on December 2nd of 2020 alongside a music video which showed Faygo's progression both sonically and artistically, with this being probably his biggest sound shift yet. And although nowadays the rage genre might seem a bit played out, at the time this track along with only a select few others would help to cause a massive wave of new rage inspired music to come out of the underground. And with the amount of support Faygo got from this single, it wouldn't be too long before he would release his next project, titled as After Me, which released on December 17th of 2020 and would really showcase Faygo's insane versatility with tracks like Hang with the Goats, Matrix, and Everyday, proving that he was far from a one-trick artist. But as we entered 2021, the thing we all knew was inevitable would end up happening, being TikTok. And for better or for worse, TikTok would send Faygo almost directly into the spotlight, with his previously mentioned 2019 single, Knock Knock, gaining a ton of traction through various different viral dance challenges that were being done to the song. And all of this was really just the beginning of what would go on to be Faygo's best year yet. With the song continually picking up steam and being placed on multiple different playlists, it wouldn't be long before the song would catch the attention of someone very important to Faygo's story, or horrible depending on who you ask, being Travis Scott, who would be the first mainstream artist to intentionally or unintentionally give Faygo his first mainstream look, with Kourtney Kardashian posting a video to her story with Faygo's song Up Off 1942 being played in the background, which might have been foreshadowing for what ended up happening in April of 2021, where it was announced that Sofaygo had finally decided to sign to Travis Scott's label, being Cactus Jack. And by this point in April of 2021, it's hard to even properly convey just how big Faygo was getting, with Faygo's song Knock Knock amassing hundreds of thousands of videos on TikTok, along with the song getting streamed millions of times within the span of only a few months, which was paired along with Faygo getting pushed pretty much everywhere, from doing lyric breakdown videos and live covers to appearing on Aiden Ross's stream at the peak of Aiden's career, all the way to getting possibly one of the biggest opportunities that any upcoming artist could ever dream of, being his own Lyrical Lemonade video, which would release on May 3rd of 2021. It would almost instantly blow up, getting millions upon millions of views within only the first few weeks. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, he disappeared. Now obviously that's a bit of an exaggeration because he would end up getting a few more placements on some major releases that year. It would also release a music video for his single titled Let's Lose Our Minds. But other than that, that was pretty much it. His next project, titled Pink Hearts, wouldn't go on to release for nearly 2 entire years, and would be relentlessly teased throughout that entire time frame, which led to some fans speculating the wait was caused because of the Astroworld tragedy that took place in November of 2021. And other fans were just claiming that Travis was just not letting Faygo drop for some unknown reason. All of which later down the line would be disproven by Faygo himself, posting in his Discord that no one was stopping him from dropping or doing really anything, and that it was just all a part of the process, which is a fair enough response, but sadly it wouldn't really be enough to stop the comparisons to another artist who around the same time was putting his all into the music and seeing a lot of results, being, you guessed it, Yeat. And although both Yeat and Sofaygo were actually on good terms and even had some alleged unreleased music together, it wouldn't really be enough to stop the fans from pitting them against each other, which would end up creating a rivalry type of image between the two artists and led to the two fan bases going back and forth with each other till eventually Yeat's hype and numbers would end up overtaking Faygo's, which at the time would only make being a Faygo fan that much harder. And it led to countless different sides of the underground community making posts and videos talking about how Faygo's career was on a downward spiral. But at the time, this didn't seem to sway Faygo too heavily. He would still continue working on his next project, taking his time doing pretty much anything that wasn't like music. From appearing in Nike commercials to going on tour, all the way to even becoming a featured artist on the XXL magazine, which would end up having some mixed opinions online, but overall it seemed like Faygo was pretty heavily backed by his core fan base, which not too long after would end up being tested, with his first release of 2022 being a before tape that released on June 14th of 2022 and was titled Before Pink, which to say the least had an extremely mixed reaction from the public, with some of the fans arguing that he was evolving, while some people were as always complaining about his sound shift, which I guess didn't seem to faze him because only a month after releasing Before Pink, he would then allegedly end up self-leaking a project that was titled as Baby Jack. And this project was one made more or less only for the core fans, with the project never being officially released on streaming services, even though it was very obviously an intentional leak. But either way, the reactions to the project were pretty overwhelmingly positive, with a lot of Faygo's core audience really enjoying the project. But sadly, this positivity wouldn't be long lasting in the Faygo community, because as we got closer to the release of his highly anticipated project, Pink Hearts, the hate, hype, and expectations would all start to build, which started most importantly with the rollout, which in all honesty was pretty damn solid, with the project getting endless push from Apple Music, with the documentary even being teased, yet another Aiden Ross appearance, and the project even got both a Jimmy Kimmel performance and a Beats by Dre ad placement. And not only that, but the project would end up dropping 4 different singles a few weeks before on October 17th of 2022, which were met with pretty okay reactions. However, when the project would finally end up releasing on November 11th of 2022, it's safe to say the response was not good. I could drone on about the same talking points, whether it be people questioning him deciding to sign to Cactus Jack, Travis not even appearing on the album or doing much promo, the questionable sound shift, or the obvious criticism of why Faygo thought waiting nearly 2 years to drop a project would be a good idea. But all in all, it's really just a combination of every one of these problems that made Pink Hearts have the reaction it did, with people almost overnight shifting opinions on Faygo, with the general consensus in the community being that he had completely wasted his opportunity and had fully fallen off. And as the hate got more widespread and the memes would just continue to ramp up more and more, the criticism would basically just be endless, with both people and creators spam uploading fall-off videos and making decently valid criticisms about the obvious problems with the project and its performance, which also, by the way, wasn't good, with the project itself going on to sell only 7K units in the first week, which for a debut studio project was underwhelming to say the least, especially when compared to his quote-unquote competition, who just that same year would go on to sell nearly 5 times the first week sales of Faygo, with his own debut studio project being 2 Alive, which sold nearly 35,000 units. And with all of the hate and disappointment building on Faygo, he would go on to do probably one of the worst things you can do as an artist, which is responding, which he would do by going onto his spam IG account and just completely lashing out at fans, telling them to essentially either enjoy the music or move on, while also letting everyone know he was financially set and didn't need his quote-unquote half supporters, which, as you could guess, wasn't really a good look for Faygo in the public eye, especially considering the fact to most people he was seen as a pretty composed and chill artist outside of the music. And if you ask me personally, I really didn't think this project was bad at all. Obviously, some of the tracks on the project are too slow and some of the features just feel out of place, and there are a few songs that kind of feel like filler, but overall the project is still solid. But truth be told, this project had like zero hope of ever living up to the hype, especially considering that when Faygo was releasing this project, he didn't have room to experiment like this. Part of the reason why other artists in the scene, like, again, I hate to be that guy, but it works, Yeat, have room to experiment like this is because the fans are constantly being fed. So when he releases a project like, for instance, Afterlife, if the fans don't like the new sound, they still have music that he dropped a few weeks ago to fall back on. But with Pink Hearts being so hyped, he had to either release a fan favorite or else he was just going to be completely pushed out of the scene. And for a while, a lot of Faygo's core audience would end up losing hope that he'd even be able to bounce back. But as we enter the new year of 2023, and as the media and memes clowning Faygo would start to die down, he would end up teasing and then releasing a 2-track EP on February 24th of 2023 titled Extra/For All My Dogs, which would release as a SoundCloud exclusive and would feed the core audience exactly what they wanted, with most importantly track 1 titled Extra being a reassuring track for most Faygo fans, feeding them a lot of the energy and flows that they were missing off of Pink Hearts. But this one single obviously wouldn't be enough to change the narrative overnight. So instead, the next EP, which was originally intended to be a Pink Hearts Deluxe titled Go Plus, would over the next few months begin to build its own hype, with different snippets leaking, Travis teasing the EP, and most importantly, a lead single off the EP would end up releasing on May 17th of 2023, titled as Yay. And the reaction to this single was pretty overwhelmingly positive, with the track being received well by both new and old fans alike. And not only was it a hit within Faygo's community, but would also end up streaming pretty impressive numbers, with the track pretty quickly amassing over 1 million plays within just a few weeks. And not long after this single came out, a music video would follow and would only further build the hype for Faygo's next EP, which would eventually end up finally releasing on June 14th of 2023, and it was titled as Go Plus. And so far, this EP has been received pretty well, with this EP most importantly bringing a lot more of the higher energy flows and melodies we were used to, with some new sounds mixed in with tracks like Foursome or On the Moon, both of which were pretty different sounds for Faygo, but both worked pretty well, paired alongside the project's production, which is in my opinion easily some of Faygo's best out of his recent drops. And altogether, this project seems like a really great step in the right direction, and it would all be the perfect build-up for his obvious appearance on the biggest project yet, being Travis Scott's album Utopia, which he was obviously going to be on, because I mean what label owner wouldn't want to give this massive of a look to an artist? Yeah, no, it didn't happen. And to quickly play devil's advocate, I understand that what Travis has done for Sofaygo so far has been decent. From working and appearing in ads for billion-dollar companies to appearing on a bunch of different media outlets, it's been overall a net positive being signed to Travis. However, it's hard to deny that the amount of potential that Faygo has does not match where he is today. The truth is, this all kind of falls on Faygo. He had his opportunity, and most people would agree he simply fumbled. But with that said, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, a glazer, whatever the fuck you want to say. I don't say that to bash him, because Faygo at his peak honestly might have one of the most consistent and just hard discographies out of anyone in the scene period. Believe me, I've already listened to an ungodly amount of Faygo for this vid, and throughout the last few years, I can pretty easily say that no matter which direction Faygo decides to go, he can pretty easily rebound from where he's at. Especially considering that nowadays, the narrative has turned pretty hard for Faygo, with his fan base pretty much being as strong as ever and even running mini promotion campaigns for him all on their own, which was done by pretty much spam posting Sofaygo gifs pretty much everywhere on the internet. And not only that, but Faygo has been doing his part to give the fans what they want by releasing quite a few different singles over the last few months, all of which have been getting some pretty positive reactions. And not only that, but if you're tapped in enough right now with Faygo's community, you would know that over the last few weeks, probably around like 15 plus different songs have leaked out, and they're sounding pretty insane, which hopefully won't affect Faygo's next release, being Never Apologize, but as always, it's mostly on Faygo to actually release the songs, or else his fans will eventually, inevitably move on. But worst case scenario, Faygo just starts an OnlyFans. And that's the video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching the video, and yeah, I've been gone for a second. I know a lot of y'all are probably curious on like what the hell possibly happened for the last year, so I'll probably end up making a second channel vid for that. I'll try to get that out soon, which basically means sometime next year, but y'all get the point. I think I've said this like 15 times, but I think I'm at a point right now to where I can make some pretty good videos for y'all. I don't want to speak about it too much though, I'll just let my actions show it. I'll try to get another video out before the end of this month if possible, which should be an album of the year video for obviously last year. I've been keeping up with this scene, and honestly I got a lot to say. But on a serious note, if you did click on this video and watch all the way to this point, I really do appreciate it. And since I'm back, I'm gonna try to get back into the full swing of things. I'll be back on my social medias, so if you want to follow me, all the links will be in the description. So until next time, which hopefully should be sometime this year, you guys have a blessed one, and I'll talk to y'all later.